stimulus. It's signed off. It's going to be signed off by the House this week, House of Representatives, which is one half of the Congress. This 1.9 trillion, and all in all, it's expected to literally be, checks in the post by mid-March. My question is, ultimately, has the market moved on from this? Is it we're beyond that's baked in the cake, or will that deliver further upward momentum for all financial assets, but oil included?
I think, Sean, there's probably about 80% baked in. I think you'll get a little bit of an upsweep from it once it's signed, sealed, and delivered, and then the check's in the mail. But the other side, of course, we've been very heavily sold off as far as Asia today in Asian equities. And I'm just looking here, we've got China down the best part of 3% and Hong Kong down 3.3%. So I also say that we've already achieved incredible growth over the last 8 or 9 months with equities. Copper's been bid up at 9,200 a metric ton and well up from the 6s and 7,000s, and have a look at where crude oil is. So maybe we're at that point of an inflection, Sean, that there's a little bit more steam there, but not a lot. I don't know whether we go around and throw the hat around, after Easter and maybe May or June, with the unemployment still shaky in the States, whether we need another round of stimulus. So I think that's the only real reason keeping it up at the moment.
Right. We've seen the beginning of grumblings, if you like. India has been quite vocal about the elevated crude price. They're reaching records every day with diesel and petrol. We've seen in Brazil, Petrobras have their CEO removed because Petrobras was raising diesel prices with the rise in the market prices, and he ended up getting fired because, of course, that's not good policy for politicians when people have to pay more at the pump. Yes. What are your thoughts about that momentum from the consumer side, that this rise in commodity prices across the board at this moment when the economies are trying to rehabilitate? Can the two coexist?
Well, Sean, that's the issue that we face and we made that in the first point, as far as inflation. All of those inputs, it's more expensive. Are wages going up? Is there growth there? So how many people are prepared in 2021 to say to their boss or their employer, I've done a really good job in 2020 and I'd like a pay rise of 15% because commodities have all gone up and everything costs more money. So I'm not sure whether there's going to be that flow on there. So I think we're getting squeezed a little bit. And as you pointed out, with crude prices back above 60, that really puts a handbrake on the wallet and the purse as far as how much they've got extra left over after they fill the car or the motorbike or the truck for their daily consumption as far as energy.
I mean, the Fed chairman may not be concerned about inflation, but truck drivers in Rio de Janeiro are.
Absolutely.
And they could be clogging up the streets there, as we saw farmers in India, etc. Victor, what is the state or the view from China regarding this rise in commodity prices? Are prices an issue on the street in China? Is there an ability for China to continue to grow in what might be a super commodity cycle?
Well, here in China, prices are not going up so significantly yet, well known. So that is not an issue yet, well. And during the holiday for the Chinese New Year, the wholesale and retail jumped. I mean, the retail jumped about 20% from last year, but was still slightly modestly below the 2019 level. So we are still expecting it to recover further to the normal level. And so prices are not an issue yet, well.
What about the issues that were happening at the ports for the offloading of the crude that was coming in? Given the backwardation in the market, a lot of floating storage wants to get to market. How is the backlog at the Chinese ports and offloading those cargoes?
Well, that's an issue, well, and that has dampened kind of buying interest to some degree, well. And port congestion as well remains as some say in Shandong, where a lot of independent refiners are located. And well, but it's not as severe as well last year when a lot of cargoes were coming in. So this tend to ease, I mean, in the near future. And well, of course, well, refiners had to pay demurrage for these cargoes when they are delayed. And so this is kind of burden on them and will dampen their refining interest to refining margins well. So, but now they are looking for cargoes to be delivered further in the future, so to avoid port congestion. And also because, well, they had a lot of refinery maintenance during March and April. So they will be, well, looking for cargoes to be delivered further in the future. So there will be some kind of impact.
Andrea, the other story that's percolating along is the geopolitical story of the return of Iran into the nuclear agreement with the permanent members of the Security Council, which of course includes Russia. Ultimately, my question to you is, how much cover do you think Russia will give Iran in this restart of negotiations, and how do you think it will play out?
Well, Russia is like ally by default of Iran, yeah, so they're called like friends by default. And also, I mean, there are some allegations that Russia cooperates on some of the matters with Iran. So I would say that Russia will not oppose, at least, the let's say defreezing of Iran-US interrelation. However, I'm now thinking loud, what the effect will it give once Iran is on oil market? And that can, of course, play quite an important impacting factor in the oil markets, because they can be quite a big producer. And yeah, so I would say the balance will be between the political and the economic interests. And at the same time, some forces in Russia were rather comfortable with US-Iran tensions. So it can be also that, let's say, without making it explicit, without making it like allowed at the Security Council, something can be done to prevent it to close Iranian-American defreezing, let's say like this.
Let's go to the survey question and give everybody in the room a chance to comment on this idea of the commodity super cycle, if indeed are we now in one. Commodities rose to their highest yesterday in almost 8 years, inevitably due to investor appetite for everything from oil to corn. Are we now in a commodity super cycle, which is inevitably where prices all rise and they ultimately keep on rising, and that it's not where we start to see in a typical cycle maybe prices would turn? So are we or are we not in a commodity super cycle, which would allow these prices to keep on roaring as we were 10 years ago when China led the surge? Peter, looking towards the rest of the week, we're halfway through. What do you think guides us going forward? The Fed announcement yesterday, or the Fed presentation, was a bit of more of the same, one might say. Powell continuing this same narrative that they're not going to do anything. We're sitting on our hands, keep the party going. What will you be watching through the rest of the week that could be directing the markets?
Sean, building on that, British, Australian and Japanese data for the week. We've got UK employment data. I made a note of that for December. So we'll take that on board. That strengthened the pound. I'm looking as far as the US dollar, 90.04. That big build up as far as energy prices, whether there's going to be a washout if equities tail off over the next 2 days, building on what happened in China today and across certain markets across Asia. And don't take your mind off South America was pretty washed out yesterday also.
I mean, are these dips to buy? Are they turns of correction?
Sean, I think more authenticity to the market to really get a closer understanding of where we are. We've had an enormous rally to the upside. Some of these markets have been extraordinary over the last 4 or 5 months, and certainly the commodity cycle has since the end of October, and really
up
some of them
60%
January.
Since the low.
Exactly.
Commodities up 60%.
And so I think that it's a point of time from a trading perspective. Remember, our traders are after days or possibly a week, or maybe a month is an eternity to hold an instrument. So they look for opportunity, and at the present time, it's very, very toppy, which allows opportunity. But I think at the present, they've really got to be very focused on the big picture, all of the fundamentals. Look at your technicals, what's happening as far as seasonality, and I'm making reference to it again. China off 3% today worries me a little bit. I just go, aha. Same with Hong Kong. So I want to see where that builds over the next matter of 2 days leading up until Friday.
Are we still do you think, are we still on the track then of the narrative that says first half is sort of recovery vaccine, second half is takeoff, that paradigm still exists?
Well,
or is it buy the rumor, sell the news?
Yeah, well, they're building on that, Sean. I think the cheap money story is the number one that's going to keep us onward and upward to some form. And that Jerome Powell saying that, Fed chair, that there's no thoughts on anyone's radar as far as lifting rates, though bond yields are up. So I just want to see over this first quarter where the lay of the land is and where the sea is. And I want to see whether we get a full tide or it's or tsunami.
Victor, from a China point of view, obviously you have enjoyed somewhat return to normal with a little bit here and there for many months now. As China looks to the rest of the world in its recovery in 21, does it make a difference, or is China positioning itself for this return in global economic growth? What is the perspective from China on the OECD economic recovery in the second half of this year?
Well, and China rolled out the dual circulation last year. That was because, it found it would be dangerous to rely on the rest of the world for its recovery and growth as well. So actually, this is a kind of indication that we need to focus more on domestic consumption instead of relying on the outside world for recovery. So actually, it's not so confident about, global recovery in the near future or anytime soon. And now, so this is what China is doing, is trying to, actually on the one hand is opening up, boosting trade with others, but on the other hand is also trying to stimulate domestic consumption to boost and to sustain its recovery. So that's its basic point of view. That's why we need to rely more on ourselves, in case something goes wrong in the world, so we can still move forward on. Yeah.
A part of that has been, and certainly last year, where China was buying a lot of commodities across the board and stockpiling for a variety of reasons. Does that continue to underpin, do you think, the commodity price upward move, that China is still a big buyer for stockpiling of all of these commodities?
Yes, this I believe will continue this year. And, we predicted the country's GDP to grow by at least, say, most people would predict it to grow by at least 6.9%. And some predict it to grow by about 8 to 9%. And so demand is still on the increase. And say like crude oil demand, surely it's growing this year again. And say like new refining capacity, and also because of China's refinery upgrading, they are actually, some refineries are still trying to find out what kind of grade, the worst kind of grade they can process, so they can improve their feedstock slate to maximize their profit. So they're still trying to process more crude grades to further diversify their grades And so also for other product commodities too, demand is still on the rise as the country's economy grows That's sure to come this year.
Let's go to the survey result before giving Andrea the last word today. Are we now in a commodity super cycle? Yes, 57%, no, 43%. So pretty close there, 50-50, but it does, every month one might ask that question, the prices keep going. You'd have to eventually say yes. Andrea, your closing thoughts on what you might be watching for the rest of the week that will be impactful for the markets?
Well, first of all, I would comment on this commodity cycles. We are certainly moving towards a commodity super cycle, because one of the reasons is that United States plans new stimulus packages, and the European Union will move for it. So both major, and I guess Japan as well. So the major currencies will have to let's say, put an additional inflow, and the additional inflow leads the commodity prices up, costs of commodity supplies and everything related to the commodity supply chain also up. So automatically, we're going to see all the cycle going up.
Which, of course, is very good for Russia as a producer of many commodities.
Yes and no, of course, it's good in many ways. And at the same time, costs will be also higher. And well, for example, Russia has now more reserves due to the gold reserves rather than from the oil fund. So that's because of the increase in the gold price. But at the same time, I mean, for producers, costs are also increasing. And that's why there are new challenges which are going to arise. And for Russia, the main difficulty is related to sanctions. And there are equipment and technologies that they have to find through other ways, and therefore costs are even higher for the companies, and costs to get capital are also higher. And you may also note, those who follow it, the exchange rate between ruble and major currencies didn't change much despite the increase in the oil price, which also gives a hint that investors do not trust the state of the situation in the Russian economy.
Interesting. Well, that's a wrap up for today. And thank you, Peter, Andrea, and Victor. We will have an interview now posted with the vice chairman of Tellurian about all things that happened in Texas last week, which, as we know, was a big ice storm, but not so big that it should have knocked out the energy infrastructure of the world's 9th largest economy. And so there's some good, useful insights as to what happened there and what is now going to happen next. And you can see the headline, as is all things in America, what happens next are the lawsuits. And that certainly will have a big impact on the direction of what happens with the energy structure in Texas. Thanks very much. We're going to have today a Fujairah workshop in half an hour for anybody of interest in the outlook for Fujairah, the world's emerging oil energy hub. So that kicks off in half an hour. But thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, Andrei, Victor. Cheers.